righty, guys. Well, we're going to get started here. I appreciate everybody being logged in and plugging in here today. I know a lot of people working from home or maybe even stuck at home. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to share some great stuff about what's going on, really some things you can do to stay relevant. Then I have the amazing Phil Speicher on here to kind of come up and talk a lot about a lot of the relief stuff going on for small business owners, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say. For those of you guys that don't know me or that I haven't met before, my name's Chris Moore. I own and work for Elite Business Advisors here. I work with a lot of small businesses and individuals. A lot of people have been asking me, what do you expect? Like, what's going on? When is this all going to end? And to be perfectly honest, I have no idea. I have no insider information on top of what you guys get in the news and the media. My wife works at Memorial Hospital here in Belleville in the St. Louis area. And sometimes I get like 2 hours notice if she even tells me, maybe something before it goes out to the news. But nobody really, in my opinion, knows what to expect. But I do know for those of us that live here in Illinois, and I know there's people plugged in from all over the country, which we're excited to have you guys on here today. We're stuck here in our homes in shelter in place at least through the end of April. And I feel like it might be a little bit past that. It's going to be, in my opinion, maybe at least June 1st before we really start seeing normal times again. But we'll leave that to the experts. We're just going to have to see how this plays out day by day. I'm not on here to talk about all that stuff. So, but I really believe, here's the one advice I've been trying to give a lot of clients and people that are asking me, what do we do? How do we prepare for this? Is the businesses that are the most innovative and creative in this time are the ones that are going to come out of this a lot stronger than they came into it. And I think there's going to be a lot of good things that come out of it, even though I know there's going to be some people and some businesses that do suffer because these can be some difficult times. But I think there's going to be a lot of good things that come out of it. I know, for example, I've been helping our church kind of with our Sunday morning, online streaming services, recording stuff and getting things together. And we've actually realized that some of the impact we've been able to have, that maybe some of these things are things we need to be doing long-term anyways when we get back to normal and are meeting on Sunday mornings again. And so I think you're going to see a lot of businesses getting kind of innovative and coming out of this with a lot of solid ideas and things to be, better, faster, stronger than we came into this situation with. So, I think the other thing is, a great thing is people are going to look at technology is going to be really the new norm, right? So Zoom is now more of a household name than it ever was before. 2 months ago, if I said, hey, you want to hop on a Zoom? They're like, what? What is that? But now Zoom is becoming very popular in FaceTime. And if you bought Zoom stock probably 4 to 6 to 8 weeks ago, high five, because I'm sure their stock price is going to continue to climb because it's being utilized like crazy. And I'm not making market forecasts or projections or anything like that, just a total guess. More of a joke, honestly, than anything. But, I think that it's becoming, a little bit more widespread. People are going to start using this a lot more for a lot of different uses. I know for me, I've got a couple of clients that, geographically, we're about an hour apart from each other. And, we've been meeting face to face. We'll try to meet in the middle or something. But we've kind of realized through doing this the last couple of weeks that we should probably just meet like this all the time, unless there's something we need to physically go over in person with use of Google Docs and technology and, Zoom platform and stuff. It probably makes more sense and convenience for us without really losing the personal touch to just start meeting like this all the time. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities because people are going to be used to doing this throughout this time period that you can utilize that moving forward. And then another thing to think about, and I don't mean just from the financial side, but just in general, is how do you prepare for something like this? I think for most of us, it's probably the first time we've ever really lived through something to this extent that's really kind of shaken things up as far as, where we can go and what we can do and things. But, just what to prepare, how to prepare for it financially so you can kind of weather it a little bit more. But then also, what items do you need in your house? Apparently, toilet paper is like the number one go-to thing for when things like this happen. So I guess we're going to be putting that on the list. You just always have 2 months supply of toilet paper, in our house. I don't know. But it kind of makes you think about, how can you, once we get through this and things do get back to normal, how can you maybe be in a better position to weather anything like this? It's a little different than, the 2008 housing crisis, bubble that we saw and that we've lived through and moved on from because, just the situation of this being a health related incident. So just, think of something like that going out of it. I think in any situation, there's always two attitudes you can have, right? There's the positive approach and the negative approach. And the negative approach isn't going to get you anywhere. It's going to make it miserable. You're going to drive people crazy. You're going to annoy the heck out of people. And then there's the positive approach, right? And I believe in the positive, realistic approach. I'd love to say, hey, May 1st, all this is going to be over. They're expecting to peak in 2 to 3 weeks, and we're going to get back to normal life. But I don't really know if that's realistic. I don't think it is. That's why I think maybe June 1st, Memorial Day weekend, might be the earliest we'll see anything starting to kind of get back to normal. But again, who actually knows that? I don't. I'm not trying to even predict any of that. But if I'm right, I'm going to point back to this webinar and remind people that I called it. So that's just my little 2 cents on that. So, because we're going to get through this. That's the big thing I want to get across to people. We're going to get through this. And I want to talk about how to really navigate these next 4 to 6 weeks and really what we can be doing to maximize our time. Maybe you've got downtime. Maybe you're working from home. You've got a lot of extra time. Maybe your business has been impacted because of this. What are some things you can be doing to move yourself and your business forward? That's the whole point of my talk here that I want to kind of go through, is how to really navigate these things. What can you be doing in the technology field, to get through your business in these times? How can you utilize Zoom and FaceTime and different things to work on your business still, to be productive and to try to just get through this as much as possible? I know a lot of contractors right now, especially in the painting industry, are doing Zoom and face estimates for people. That's harder to do if you're like building a deck or something, like that. But for a lot of trades, doing some FaceTime estimates is actually an option, especially if your estimating is a systematic, approach to it. You can really get those things accomplished via that. And I wouldn't be surprised to start seeing a lot of that kind of becoming that new norm, like we talked about for certain things. So I'm excited to see where that goes, a year from now. But I know contractors that were doing this 6 months to a year ago, not because of the coronavirus stuff we're living through, but because they started doing that because there was value in there. So, how can you utilize technology for your business? I know a lot of industries already use e-signatures and different things, but putting documents online, I do work with a handful of, contractors across different trades, and, the ones that used to do paper estimates, they would write out. You can't really do that, I guess. You could scan it or you could mail it if you're doing a video estimate. So a lot of them are transitioning now to doing their bidding and stuff digital, like, having something they can type on and email it over right afterwards. So just trying to be innovative and think of ways that you can not only get through these times, but again, how can you utilize that to become more efficient and more productive out of this situation? So, using Microsoft Teams and Google Docs and just cloud-based things, how can you utilize that to communicate with your employees, with your bosses, with, the people that work for you, anything like that, just to, or customers as well. What tools can you utilize for some of those pieces of your day-to-day operations? So another thing, I talked earlier about the positive and the negative, right? And I think being a positive voice for your clients will actually be attractive. And again, I'm not saying you got to be all like, oh, the world is great, everything's awesome, this is all fine. But I think, really kind of taking that positive approach. Now, I'll be the first person to admit, this has been an interesting couple of weeks. Like, I am used to being out. I'm used to being at networking events and, always out. Even though I do work from home, this is my office I'm in here right now. But, I'm not at home 40 hours a week, right? Or I'm not limited to having to be here 168 hours a week. So it's been a little bit of an adjustment. And honestly, 2 weeks ago, if you would have said, hey, you're going to be in the house literally 167 hours of the next, 168 hours, whatever, for the next couple of weeks, I would have probably said after day 12, I'll be going for a psych eval because I'll just go crazy. Like, I can't deal with it. But, I've actually, no joke, aside from like taking the dog for a walk and stuff, like just going and driving around for 30 minutes, not stopping anywhere, just literally getting out of the house and seeing sunshine and like different scenery. That's helped. And just doing some of these things that I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes is really kind of kept me engaged, where it hasn't been a struggle. Like, yeah, there's kind of a day here and there where I'm just like, like I need to get around people. But, for the most part, it really hasn't been as bad as I thought. I think a lot of it has to do with kind of taking that positive attitude and finding the positive in what we're going through and how I can utilize this time to do certain things for my business. And so, what your clients are going to pick up on that. Your clients are going to pick up on the attitude. And I think the one thing I want to talk about, with that and utilizing technology and just different things is having posture in doing it, right? So the first time that you may do, and again, I'm just going to use the contractor example here. It'll apply to every industry. The first time you might do an estimate via FaceTime, it's probably going to be weird. it's going to be different for you. The first time you even tell a client, hey, yeah, we'll just do an estimate via FaceTime, blah, 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 it's going to feel weird. But guess what? The first time you went and did an estimate in person probably felt weird. And the first time you scheduled it on the phone probably was like weird. And so you just got used to it. So just fake it till you make it and have a little bit of posture. And, hey, this is how we're doing things right now. It's not a big deal. And if you make it sound like it's not a big deal, then the client also feels like it's not that big of a deal, right? So I think that's really important to have posture as you're going through some of these transitions with people. And then test out as much technology ahead of time as you can. Whether it's, FaceTime or Zoom or different Google Docs or sharing things and figuring all that stuff out. Try to test it with, a spouse, family member, friends, anything like that. We've tested, the Zoom platform for the recording and this webinar today over the last 24 hours, a couple different times, just because we were tweaking some settings and getting everything how we wanted it. And I just wanted to make sure it worked. Now, granted, it's technology. It's 2020. There's going to be issues. Things are still going to happen. People are going to understand that. It seems like they can't get like credit card terminals and computer software to work at like retail stores still sometimes. There's still glitches. There's hangups. Again, that's going to happen. So people are going to understand that. But the more you can limit that, I think the more successful you're going to be. And just the more professional you're going to come across as you're figuring out how to do these things, right? You may have to tweak your sales process to how you're going to go through a digital estimate with them versus an in-person one. And talk to somebody. If you need help with that, obviously that's some stuff that we can help with. But talk to somebody that's maybe gone through that and can really offer you some guidance if you're struggling to need help with it, or just figure it out on your own. I believe you're smart enough to do that. So, and I don't mean that in a condescending way, but so I think I'm a big proponent of cultivating relationships. Like I talked about, I love going to networking events. I love building relationships with people. On a personal level, I'm kind of a social person, but even, from a business perspective too. And I guarantee you, if I didn't know Phil and I just saw something that he had published on LinkedIn or something and called him on Monday and was like, hey, Phil, would you like to hop on a webinar with me on Thursday and do this? He might have done it because he's an awesome guy. But without that relationship, he probably would have been like, dude, I got 100,000 other things going on right now. Like, maybe now's not a good time. Like I said, I think he would have because he's a good guy. But, but having that relationship with him for over the last 2 years and getting to know him, that when I called him on Monday and was like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Do you have any interest in hopping on with me? He was like, yeah, man, I'd love to. Let's do it. It's because we built that relationship over time. So I'm a huge proponent of that anyways, but how can you really cultivate those relationships in the times we're living in right now? And I think, one thing is, try to be face over voice, right? If you can be face to face on Zoom or FaceTime with people, that's way more effective than a phone call, a text, or an email. Text and emails down here, phone calls here because they can hear your voice, and then anything like this is going to be the best thing you could possibly do right now. And I'm not saying don't text and call and email people. I think it's really important to reach out to, friends and family members, obviously, but also, referral partners, business associates, past clients, current clients, anybody in those realms that you should be cultivating relationships with for personal and business purposes. Reach out to them. Again, even if it is just a text or something, just say, hey, was just thinking about you. How are you and your family doing? Like, how are you guys doing, through these times? Do you need anything? Can I help you with something? Be willing to on a personal level if they need it. Don't just offer and be like, oh no, I'm sorry, just kidding. But hopefully if you're on this call, you're probably sincere enough to really ask those questions. But how can you cultivate those relationships? I think that just being there for people in times like this, people need human connection right now. I know Christina, my wife, and I are just hopping on Zoom calls like this with different friends, like each evening and stuff, and throughout the weekend. We're going to try doing a couple of game nights here later this week and testing some stuff out with technology, just because we miss our friends. Like, and we're maybe going to kill each other if we don't get some other people involved in our lives. But that's another topic. But I think that it's just really important to connect to people. People need that engagement right now. They need to feel that closeness to people. So what kind of technology, what kind of things can you be doing to, really cultivate that and connect with the right people? If you can connect with key referral partners and have great conversations and build relationships now, it's just going to set your business up for success. Maybe help you through this time, but also set it up for that much more success afterwards. And then if you're wanting to do something like that, there's always kind of two people in the world. There's people that create opportunities, and there's people that wait for opportunities and plug into it. And so if you haven't really seen anything like that popping up in any of your, inner circles with friends and business associates and stuff, create it. I just had the idea to do this webinar and stuff. I thought it would be great to get some information and maybe try to help some people. And hopefully some of what I've got to say is going to stick and help you guys grow and get through this. And I know what Phil has to share definitely will, but I think it's important to, don't be afraid to just create it and figure it out. Again, now's a perfect time. If you're going to ever waste an hour of your productive life, this is probably the time to do it, to be honest. So, go do that. I've seen people that are hosting, happy hour socials at 4 o'clock with like a small business group of friends that, they usually get together once a month or something, and they're all getting on Zoom with a glass of wine or a beer and hanging out and catching up and maybe talking some business and stuff. So, don't be afraid to create something if you're not seeing those opportunities kind of plug around there for you. But here's what I really want to talk about for the rest of the time and then I promise I'll turn it over to Phil. But, I really want to talk about how you can spend this time growing yourself and growing your business. For most of you guys on here know me. I'm a huge advocate of personal development, personal growth. I set a goal about 2.5 years ago to read 3 books a month, and I've stuck to it so far. We're probably 27, 28 months into it. In some months it's a challenge, but it keeps me intentional and focused on it. But how can you spend, time doing those things and investing in yourself? And so first off, I want to talk about how can you invest into your family, your spouse, your kids, and all of those things. Because one thing I think that I've seen, which I think is really cool, is that people are really taking the time to reconnect with their family. We've kind of reprioritized the busyness, right? It seems like everybody's kind of back to zero for the most part. I know some people still have to go to a job and all those things. But if you're at home, you've kind of been able to reprioritize and realize maybe how busy you usually are and how you can reconnect with your kids and how can you spend this time to invest in them and their skills and their life skills, depending on maybe what age they are and stuff. But I know a friend of mine, she's working from home now and she's got a 12-year-old son that's obviously home from school. And she's like, yeah, we're going to cook breakfast together one morning and I'm going to teach him how to cook. She's like, I don't know when I would have really had the opportunity to do that. She's like, I know I would have probably maybe on a weekend or something, but she's like, it's really given me an opportunity to try to find things to, invest in his education outside of the traditional school setting. And I love that. She got some information from us on, financial information for teens and whatnot to kind of go through and put together curriculum for him on budgeting and all that stuff. So I think it's really cool. And I think, if you get too wrapped up in the news and the media and social media and different things, it's easy to kind of get that negative approach to this. But I think there's a lot of really positive things going on, the way people are coming together and they're, reconnecting and doing all those things. I think there's a lot of positives going on out there. So don't forget that all that good stuff still happening in the world. So that's one aspect of it, and then how do you invest in yourself? Like I talked about, reading, listening to podcasts and different audios, in your business and your industry and different things, I think is super important to develop your skill sets. Again, there's the personal side of it with finances and with marriage and parenting and all different kinds of information. And then there's the professional development with business and leadership and sales and people skills and all those different things. And so I think it's really important to, use this time to do that. I always hear, anytime people see the book goal or different things like that I've got, I'm like, man, I just can't find the time to read. And I always know, like, it's kind of an excuse, right? Because I used to make that same excuse. I'm not pointing fingers, full transparency. I used to make that same excuse. Like, I don't have time to read. And then I started really making it a habit. Started out with 10 minutes or 10 pages a day and growing into it. 1 book a month, 2 book a month, 3. I'd like to go to 4 at some point in the next few years. We're not totally there yet. But here's what I'll say. For people that usually make that excuse, right, that I don't have time to read, what's your excuse right now? And I might be a little harsh in saying that, but seriously. And if you really don't want to read, you're going to find another excuse. You're going to say, oh, we don't have any books, or I don't know. You'll come up with something great. But I think it's really important to, take some of this time to invest in yourself and maybe start to create some new good habits, right? I think it's going to be really easy to eat frozen pizza and junk food and stuff, but it's also probably, if you're home 24 hours a day, it's going to be probably really hard not to eat all the time. But again, personal testimony. But, I think it's an opportunity to create some new good habits in your life to again, come out of this stronger than you came into it. So, one thing I really believe that coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous. I've had the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller on my list to read for a few months now. I've had a lot of people recommend it. I've wanted to read it, just haven't really had an opportunity with a lot of their books, group class, like books I'm in, learning organizations and stuff. And so I finally had a chance to pick it up, started reading it yesterday. I'm about 50 pages into it, and I've really gotten a lot of great nuggets out of it. But I read something this morning as I was kind of putting together this talk that kind of hit and stuck with me. So, we talk about productivity and to-do lists, and that's what I want to kind of talk about here for a second. I used to have one massive to-do list, and it was like overwhelming. I'd probably get some anxiety about it. It would stress me out because, especially when I was busy, it was like 7 things would go on and 3 things would come off. And I'm a good list person. Like I'm a detailed person. I like lists. I like just being able. There's some satisfaction in crossing something off. Just it's a little fulfilling. And I'm not gonna lie. There's some days, if my wife's gone and I'm doing some stuff around the house and I've got a list going, I'll like do something and I'll be like, oh, it wasn't on the list. Let me write it on there and then cross it off, just so I feel a little more productive. When she gets home, so she doesn't feel like I just sat here and did nothing all day. So just a little marriage tip for everybody. That works really well unless you just told them their secret on a webinar that you're recording. So probably not a smart idea on my part, but I'll live with it. Anyways, so what to-do list, Darren Hardy talked about it was either the compound effect or the entrepreneur roller coaster, to take your massive to-do list and break it up day by day. To look at your week to see what your really busy days were and maybe filter in a couple of things on there, and then find the days where you had a little bit more time and kind of put the majority of your to-do list on there and kind of break it up day by day. And that really, honestly, has helped me a lot in the last couple of years, just as far as getting stuff done and not feeling overwhelmed and actually disciplined and following through on it, right? Because when you have a to-do list of 80 things, it's really hard to ever feel like you're accomplishing anything, just slowly getting through it. And so I started doing that. But Gary Keller took it kind of to a whole nother level today for me. And he said, every day, as you've got your list of things that need done, you should have 3 categories that they fall under. And so for some of you folks that aren't detail oriented, just check out here for about 90 seconds and then check back in with us. I get it. I'm sorry if I'm totally detail overwhelming you. But for people that are like me, it really made me realize I need to prioritize these to-do lists. And so what he says is you should have your have to do's, your should do's, and your could do's. Your have to do's are, what's the 1 or 2 things that if it's the only thing you got done today, it would still be a productive day? That theoretically you could wake up in the morning, roll out of bed, do these 1 or 2 things, go back to bed until the next morning, and you could consider that an actual productive day. And that should be the first thing you focus on, and nothing else matters except for those couple of things. And then once you get done with your have to do's, then you do your should do's, which are the things that kind of need done here in the next couple of days. And then you've got your could do's, which is if you've got some extra time, then do these things. That might be calling the vet to make an appointment for your dog to get his shots in 4 to 6 weeks or something like that. Something that can be put off, a few days if you haven't got around to it yet. But no matter what, your have to do's are the ones getting done, because those are the most important things to move you and your business forward. And that really hit home with me, because I know a lot of times in the morning, if I've got a little bit of time, I'll like kind of do the easy things, which are usually like the could do's, right? The call the vet, the do this, hey, get online and transfer this money, like just the really simple things. And then I kind of put the have to do's off until maybe I get back home from client meetings and different events. And it's like 6 o'clock and I just really don't have the energy to do the have to do's, right? I've been going all day. And so what he talks about is if you can just get the have to do's done first, and then the other things are just not as much of a priority, that's really the best way to attack to-do list and to be as efficient and productive as possible. So I had to share that with you guys. Like I said, super fresh. I'm only 50 pages into the book, but I would strongly suggest, getting a copy of it and reading it here while we're going through this downtime. So, but what I want to talk about here for this last few minutes is working on your business and not in your business. And for those of you guys that are clients of mine on this call, I apologize because you've probably heard me say this about 150,000 times so far. So I apologize. But I think it's really important to A, know the difference between that, and B, spend this time working on your business. So for my painting friends out there, my painting contractors, it's really obvious when you're working on your business and working in your business, right? Because you're working in your business if you come home with more paint on your clothes than you went to work with, unless you're just really that good of a painter. And I'm not buying it because every painter has paint on them somewhere. So and you're working on your business if you come home just as clean as you left the house in the morning. It's really easy for some industries. But for some industries, as I've found in the last few years with consulting, it's a little bit more of a gray area in there, right? Because working in my business is meeting with clients and working on projects for them. Working on my business is, doing, the website and social media marketing and just all the different things, the strategy and the vision and the ideas and implementation and stuff. So it's not as clearly defined as somebody that's in like the trades industry or different aspects. So, but how can you use this time to work on your business? I think is the most important thing I want you guys to take away from this today, and that can be multiple things. One, getting creative with marketing. I think marketing is a huge thing for people. And I think first off, before you can get creative with it, you need to have some sort of a marketing plan and a strategy. I come across a lot of people who are like, oh, I've got business cards out at these places in town. I've got a vehicle wrap on my car or truck or vehicle, anything like that. And they think that it's just like that's their marketing plan. And I agree that those things are important, but it needs to be one part to the whole plan, right? You can't just rely on a billboard to advertise for your whole business. That needs to be one of 10 to 20 different methods of marketing and advertising you're using. So I think that that's really important, that if you don't really have a plan, or if you've never really thought and strategized through that before, now's the time to sit down and really think about those things. Hey, what am I doing? What's working well? What's not? What are some other things I can do to add into that to complement and all, it's all about brand recognition and stuff too. So how can I reach the most amount of people through multiple mediums and marketing and stuff? So I think that's the first thing, is to have a plan. And then how can you start executing on it? So, one thing is people being at home or on social media and things online way more now than normal. And I'll admit this. I've been on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn probably more in the last 2 weeks than was the last 2 months before that. And just because it's easy and you've got more downtime, and, it's a lot, that's just kind of the go-to for a lot of people, right? Your phones. It's disturbing how many times I pick my phone up a day, right? And when they show me that stat, I just turn it off because it's kind of embarrassing, but it's a good realization moment. But, so how can you get creative on social media right now? How can you do things online to really capitalize on the amount that people are on social media and different things? And so, one thing that's nice about social media, and especially Facebook, and I know there's other services that will do it for Instagram and stuff, is that you can plan posts out for the next 6 months. Now, kind of make sure it's relevant, make sure you weren't posting 6 months ago and, oh yeah, interior, blah, 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 and this, and people don't want you in your homes right now. It's not probably real relevant. So make sure it's consistent with the times. Don't just put it on autopilot, but schedule out, your videos and your pictures and posts for the next couple of months, and just get things ready to go to where when things are back normal, and maybe you're in an industry where it's going to be a little chaotic, when things do kind of get put on hold or off a hold, to really capitalize and have everything else ready so you don't even have to worry about it. I think social media is one place that you could be doing that. I know for me, I've got, obviously we're doing this webinar, but I've got a bunch of other things with some videos and different content stuff that I want to put together, for our clients and just for other people in the business community. And this is a perfect time for me to actually start doing and making that stuff happen and executing on it. And because I have kind of put it off on the back burner the last few months, even though I know it's important, I just haven't prioritized it. But now is a perfect time to work on some of that stuff. So I think really just how can you get creative? How can you do some things? For those of you guys that are still busy right now, I'm really glad to see that. And I hope that continues for you, and that you don't inherit some of the downtime or, working from home time that some people on this call are. But I think it's just as important for you guys to work on these same things that I just talked about, as much as it is to people that have a little bit more time and are a little bit slower right now. Because if you guys don't work on that, and the people that have more time to do it they're going to rocket right past you when things get back to normal. So I think it's just as important. Don't get head faked by the fact that you're still busy now. I think it's really super important to still work on these things, because it's still there, right? People are still on social media. So whether you're busy now or you're not, you should still be on social media advertising to just continue to grow your business after the fact in the months and years to come. So one thing that I think is really important, and I want to really focus on this for a second. Anything, think through the last 4 to 6 months. Anytime you've said the words, I don't have time for, or I wish I had the time to blank, write down 5 things that fall into those categories of things you've said, and go do those now. Again, whether it's for personal, whether it's for business, it doesn't really matter. But think through some of those things. What are the things you should say, man, if I had more time, I would, or I don't have the time to do this. Because most people have the time to right now. So now is a perfect time to do some of those things, either for just personal enjoyment or fulfillment or growth or business growth or anything. Now is the time to do that. Now is also a great time to catch up on, accounting and paperwork and organizational stuff. For my accountant friends, I'll put a plug in here. Guys, get caught up on your mileage logs. I know that's usually like the one thing that gets put by the wayside, or at least get caught up on your books if you haven't. If you don't do that on a normal basis, now's the time. But I think it's important to do, just some of those things. If you're in an industry that there's a lot of regulations and paperwork you have to stay caught up on, do some of the tedious stuff now, because it's much better to do it now when there's not a whole lot else you can do versus when you're in the daily grind of it, getting caught up later on. And then, the other thing is organization, cleaning out files if you still have paper files, and organizing, cleaning out your computer storage and your phone storage, and just all those little things, right? Like, I know those are really small things, but I'm trying to give people kind of a big gambit of things that you can be doing right now to just take advantage of some of this extra time on your hands. What are things that you can do that are going to need done at some point anyways? When your phone gets full of storage, you're going to have to clean it out. And if that's 4 months from now and you're busy all the time, it's going to be a little easier to take a couple hours now and do some of that stuff. So these are some of the things I've kind of been trying to do over the last couple of weeks too. So I just wanted to share kind of a list of things with you guys. But I'm going to leave you guys with a couple thoughts. So I mentioned the book by Gary Keller, The One Thing. I would strongly suggest getting your hands on that, going through it and figuring out what your one thing for your business is. His whole kind of point in that is to drive down to what's the one most important thing you need to be doing for your business to generate revenue and profit. I already know that, so I'm excited to see how he gets to that point. But now is a great time for you guys to figure that out if you don't know it. There's a great book by Simon Sinek, Sinek, called Start With Why. And that's been one of the most impactful books for me, was to figure out what my why is in business. And to understand that there's the what and the how. We know those things. We know what we do and we know how we go about doing it. But do you really know why you're doing what you're doing? Do you have that purpose and that mission behind it? And if you do, are you communicating that to your customers? I've become a big fan of Donald Miller's Build Your Story brand, or Building a Story brand. And I know some people on this call are huge and have taken some of his classes and stuff and are really big plugged into it. They're the ones that kind of led me onto him. But he's really good about how do you communicate your message through your marketing of what your why is. So he kind of bridges the gap between, start with why and then how to actually communicate that into your marketing plan and strategy that hopefully you'll create or you already have. And just really going through that. So now's a perfect time to really dive deep into some of those things. That's the working on your business that I'm talking about, is diving deep to figure out some of those things that really are the core values for your business. That's another one. Do you have core values for your business? If you don't, even if you don't have employees or anybody else, put some in place right now, because it's going to be the guiding principle for your company as you continue to grow and get employees down the road and stuff. So I would really encourage you to plug into those couple of things, start thinking into a deeper, level. If you guys ever want to chat, feel free and reach out. I'm going to put my contact info on here. We'll have a slide at the end for Phil's info as well. Feel free and reach out. I'd love to chat. I'd love to have a conversation. If you're looking for some things, how can I do this? Please let me know. That's what I'm here for. I'd be more than happy to help out throughout the situation. But I want to leave you guys with a quote. It was a book I just finished reading a few days ago called $1 Million Launch by Alan Weiss. He's a consultant, which is very ironic. But he had a paragraph towards the end, and it really hit home. And I think it's very applicable to where we're at right now. And here's what it says. It says, every day you should be moving forward, no matter how slightly. Call a referral source, write a blog post, create a new graphic illustration for social media. Do something. If you do a little every day, you will accomplish a great deal by the end of the month. Think of this as compound interest. You can read a 300-page book in a month at just 10 pages a day, or you can read it in a week at 40 pages a day. And let me tell you, 10 pages a day is a heck of a lot easier to do, and you still get the same result at the end of the month. So I wanted to leave you guys with that. Guys, just do something every single day to kind of move yourself and your business forward. I think that's the biggest key right now is really just leveraging this time to move the needle forward a little bit every single day. And you're going to be in a much better spot. Like I said, we're all going to come out of this much stronger than we came into it, much more innovative, much more efficient, and finding some unique ways to move forward. And the businesses that spend this time to search for those things to make that happen are the ones that I really can't wait to see them grow in the coming years, because they're going to go on to do great things. So I really enjoy sharing with you guys. I hope that you can take a couple of nuggets out of that. I tried to kind of make it wide, so maybe there'd be one or two things you could take out of that and apply. I said, love to have a conversation if anybody ever wants to chat or needs help with anything. But I want to get Phil on here. Phil is a master and a guru with anything finance and tax related. He's a managing partner in Mathis, Murphy, and Richter here in Belleville. And I'm very excited to hear what he has to say. I know he's been eating, sleeping, and breathing this stuff for the last 72 hours, week, however long it's been. And I'm really excited to hear the things he's got to share. So, Mr. Speicher, I'm going to turn it over to you. The rest of the time is yours. I appreciate you being on here today, and it's all yours, buddy.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, glad to be here, everybody. I have been sleeping and breathing this act for the last week, and so we're just trying to work our way through it, get everybody ready to file all their applications. The applications for regular businesses open tomorrow, and then applications for sole proprietorships and independent contractors and things are supposed to open up on the 10th. So everybody's scrambling to apply for their money. So I'm going to basically just go through. I want to try to leave as much time as I can for questions because I know there are a lot. So, but I'm going to take a little time to kind of go through the basics and give you the groundwork of how this this whole Paycheck Protection Program works. And then from there, yeah, as you have questions, submit them in the chat, and we'll try to get to all of them and make sure we answer them. So basically, the bottom line of this program is it starts off as a loan, but it's intended to be a grant. It's free money. And the only reason that it is a loan in the first place is so the government can retain a few strings to make sure that people use the money for what it was intended. And that is using it for payroll costs, utilities, loan interest, and rent costs. And so effectively, if the government were to just they wouldn't have the ability to make sure that everybody is actually spending the money on what they want it spent on. So what they do is they loan the money, and then the money is to be spent within 8 weeks. And then as long as it's spent on things that that are authorized, and as long as the company complies with a couple other requirements regarding layoffs and payroll retention and things like that, then the whole loan is forgiven, and it effectively becomes what it was intended to be, and that's a grant. So that's kind of the setup of the whole thing. Generally speaking, when it comes to eligibility, any business that has no more than 500 employees, and this is intended to include self-employed individuals, independent contractors, sole proprietorships. There's some ambiguity as to how certain types of independent contractors or pass-through businesses are going to be treated on some of these items, but we'll get into that a little bit. But for the most part, it's intended for everybody to essentially help them be able to maintain payroll and restore some of the lost money that is either has been lost currently or is going to be lost here in the next few months. So when it comes to the amount that a business can receive, the business can receive essentially 2.5 times their average monthly payroll, which includes full-time employees, part-time employees, independent contractors that they pay, and then it also includes expenses for payroll costs include retirement benefits that the employer pays, health insurance benefits that the employer pays, and essentially state unemployment taxes. It's any state and local tax that's levied on the income, but that typically is just unemployment. It doesn't include your Social Security and Medicare taxes that the employer pays at the federal level, and it doesn't include federal unemployment, but the number does start out with gross wages for the employee. So in effect, it does include the employee's half of Social Security and Medicare that's typically withheld. That's already subsumed within the amount of the gross wages that are paid to the employees. So, and then the number is capped at essentially 2.5 months of $100,000 equivalent annual salary. And so one of the questions that's been out there that we can talk a little bit about here in a minute is whether or not the $100,000 cap applies to just the salary, but allows you to then add the retirement benefits, health insurance benefits, things like that on top, or if the $100,000 cap is intended to be to apply to all of that in the aggregate, so that the combination of those expenses cannot exceed $100,000. We're pretty certain that the answer is it's just limited to salary, so it's a $100,000 salary plus the benefits on top of it. But there's still some ambiguity in the statute, and hopefully there will be some clarification on that later. So effectively, for any business that has employees that where some make over $100,000 and others make under $100,000, basically for any employee that makes $100,000 or more, the business will get $20,833, I believe it is, which would be 2.5% of the monthly average for them, plus the benefits that are paid on top. And then for any employee that's under the 100, they would get 2.5 times whatever their actual annual costs were. And the average annual payroll for purposes of calculating this is the 12-month period ending on the date of the application. So if somebody were to apply tomorrow, basically it would be the 12-month period of April 1 through March 31st for all intents and purposes. So you would take your total 12-month costs, you would add all of those up, then you divide it by 12 and you multiply it by 2.5, and there's your number. And so then one of the real important distinctions that needs to be made is the calculation of the amount of the loan that you get is not the same as the calculation of how the loan is forgiven. So essentially, as we talked about, the amount of the loan initially is 2.5 times monthly average monthly payroll. But then when it comes to forgiveness, number one, it's an 8-week calculation instead of 2.5 months. And number two, it allows you to spend the money on a few extra things that are not included in the calculation of the loan amount. So for example, the way it works is once you get the money, within 8 weeks, you have to spend the money on payroll, utilities, loan interest on any loans that the business owes, and rental expense. Like I said, rent, utilities, loan interest, and payroll. So effectively, what it comes down to is assuming that you maintain your normal average payroll, it will cover 2 months worth of payroll, and then other expenses, other authorized expenses, up to half of an annual or average monthly payroll. And so when you get the money within 8 weeks, you have to use it for those qualifying expenses. And then you have to document to the lender through an application for forgiveness that you spent all of the money on authorized expenditures during that 8-week period. And assuming that you document that and substantiate that fact, then you apply to the lender for forgiveness, and the lender will make the determination that it is forgiven, and then they go along from there. If for some reason the money is not used for authorized expenses, or for some reason you don't have enough payroll or enough expenses because of the way the averages worked out, that you don't end up using all of the money for authorized expenses, then what happens is you still get partial forgiveness for the entire amount that you did spend on authorized expenditures, but the difference continues to be a loan. Typically, it would be repayable over 10 years at a rate of no higher than 4%. So there's no real major downside to that, other than that some of it may be repayable as a relatively long-term loan if it's not used the way it was intended to be used. And then the other limitation on the calculation of the forgiveness has to do with payroll retention and the number of full-time equivalent employees that you have at the time that you apply versus the period of forgiveness, and then also whether or not you have reduced any individual's payroll by more than 25%. So generally speaking, as long as you have the same number of full-time equivalent employees during the 8-week period that you did in the period leading up to the application. Typically, that period is February 15th of 2020 through the date of the application, or through April 30th or 26th, I believe is the time frame. As long as you have the same FTE calculation. Actually, no, the period is February 15th through June 30th. If your average FTE during that period is not, it is just as much as your average FTE during the 8 weeks after you get the money, then you are fine on the forgiveness. If for some reason your average FTE during the test period is during the 8 weeks is less than the test period, then you would have a proportionate reduction in the amount of your forgiveness based on the difference in the number of FTE employees. So it gets a little bit complicated, but suffice it to say that essentially you want to make sure that you don't lay off any employees. And if you have laid off any employees prior to this point, you would generally want to make sure that you bring them back by June 30th. And as long as you bring them back by June 30th, then in most circumstances, you'd satisfy the requirement and you'd be fine. And then same goes with any individual employee's compensation. If you have an employee that had their compensation reduced by more than 25%, you would have to restore it to the full prior salary or compensation prior to June 30th in order to maintain full forgiveness. If you continue having reduced salaries for employees that is a reduction of 25% or greater, then you would be subject to a proportionate reduction in the amount of forgiveness, and it would cause a portion of the funds to be repayable over that 10-year period. Let's see here. And one other thing that has kind of come up that's a little bit interesting, we're not sure where this is coming from, but it is something to be aware of. So we've noticed on some information issued by the Treasury Department and some references to the actual application that the Small Business Administration has published. We're noticing that there's a statement on there that it is expected that due to likely high subscription to this program and applications to the program, it is expected that no more than 25% of the loan funds would be used to pay for anything other than payroll costs. So that limitation is not anywhere in the CARES Act itself, and I've not seen where that limitation has come from or how the Treasury Department came up with it, because it's not a part of the law itself. However, we would probably suggest that people be careful about making sure that, if you get the money and you, for some reason, spend more than 25% of that money on things other than payroll, I'm not sure what exactly would happen, but there's a possibility that the banks may say that they believe it's not forgivable. So you want to be careful about that. The primary purpose of this whole program is to incentivize employers to retain employees and subsidize the cost of their employment for at least a couple months. So that's just something to be aware of and be careful about. The business, the loans, in terms of how you apply for a loan, the SBA published an application a couple days ago, and that is the application that, as far as I understand, most of the banks, or all the banks, are probably using. It's a relatively simple application. There are a couple things that you'll need to watch out for, and some people, it can end up being a little more complicated than you would think just on the face of the application. And part of that gets to affiliation rules. If you have people who own multiple businesses and they're applying for this loan for one of the business, or they're applying for all the businesses, you have to be somewhat familiar with the affiliation rules to know whether or not you have to disclose affiliation affiliate relationships among other companies. The affiliations basically make sure that you don't own two or three companies or two or three businesses that all combined, all three of them have more than 500 employees, even though no single one of them has 500 employees. But they want to make sure that you're not breaking your business into smaller businesses just to get around the 500 employee cap. And then things like that. Also for eligibility for anybody out there who has a $4 million payroll that's going to be applying for a $10 million loan under this program. Same thing. They want to make sure that you don't have three businesses who would be, in theory, entitled to more than $10 million, and try to circumvent that limitation by using the multiple businesses. So there's a little bit of planning in terms of documentation and completing the application that needs to be done so that you've got your affiliation information documented and taken care of if that's going to be an issue. And then there are, several certifications that have to be made on the application in terms of, certifying that the information being submitted is true and correct. And, due to the economic uncertainty of the current circumstances, this loan is necessary to support payroll and support maintaining employees and things like that. So all those are pretty basic, and they're really fraud prevention mechanisms. A couple of people ask, well, how do we know if we really need this money? We may not see an economic detriment until, 2 months from now or 3 months from now. So am I allowed to certify that the uncertainty of due to current economic uncertainty related to the COVID crisis, and do I really need this money to support payroll? And what we've been advising people is, this is not a statement that requires people to certify that they have actually experienced an economic detriment immediately at this present time. Really, the purpose of this entire statement and this certification is to prevent fraud and to make sure that people aren't essentially, pretending to be eligible for money that they're not really eligible for. And it's just a way for the government to be able to come back to people in the event that there were blatantly false statements on the application, or if people were committing fraud with their applications, circumstances where they don't actually own a business, but they're submitting this application trying to get free money under fake circumstances. So, so that's pretty much how the application process works. The banks, from what I understand, the banks are going to have some requirements to verify the information and verify the calculation. We don't exactly know yet how much documentation the banks are going to be required to review by the SBA in order to approve the loans. So we're recommending that basically everybody provide the whatever documentation you use to come up with your calculation. You need to be able to provide that to the bank if they need it, in order for them to be able to verify the calculation of your average monthly payroll over the 12-month period ending on the date of the application. So just make sure you've got your documentation in order and things like that. And then let's see, we've talked about forgiveness a little bit. There's some questions, is the loan automatically forgiven? We talked about that. No, it's, you have to apply for forgiveness after you can show that you have spent the money on authorized expenses. Let's see here. And then the other question, a lot of times, everybody or most everybody is aware of cancellation of debt income. And if you ever have a loan that's canceled, or, you take a loan and then for some reason it's defaulted and the loan is canceled or part of it is forgiven, typically that is taxable income to the borrower that you have to pay tax to the federal government for the amount of the loan that you didn't repay. But the CARES Act specifically says that, the forgiven portion of this money is not cancellation of indebtedness income, so you don't have to pay taxes on the amount of the loan that is forgiven. And then for the most part, these loans are not going to require any personal guarantees or any pledge of collateral. They are 100% guaranteed by the SBA. So for purposes of the bank, this is virtually a risk-free transaction, because to the extent that there are any issues with either forgiveness and repayment, or if, suppose, for example, a borrower uh, takes the loan, they don't end up spending it for what they're supposed to spend it on, and then they don't get forgiveness, and so the bank actually now has a loan that has to be repaid. That loan is still 100% guaranteed by the SBA. So if the borrower defaults on that loan, the bank has the ability to go back to the SBA and get reimbursed for the full amount of the loan that was defaulted, and then it would be up to the SBA at that point to pursue the borrower for repayment. Um, and then finally, the last thing is disaster relief loans. And there's been a lot of confusion over, number one, people going to the SBA website and applying for a disaster relief loan, thinking that they are applying for the Paycheck Protection Program funds. And that's not the case. The application on the SBA website for disaster relief loans is a separate SBA program that is potentially available to the person or the business. However, the Paycheck Protection Loan specifically is applied for through an authorized SBA lending bank. And what can happen is the major difference, well, number one, if somebody gets a disaster relief loan, they would have to convert it into a paycheck protection loan in order to be eligible for forgiveness. A disaster relief loan is typically not forgivable. It's really an actual loan. And then number two, you want to avoid overlap. If you have already obtained a disaster relief loan for the same things that the paycheck protection loan is intended to reimburse for, particularly payroll costs, then the disaster relief loan will reduce the amount of the paycheck protection loan that you're eligible for. Now, in theory, as far as I understand, everybody who has received a disaster relief loan after January 31st, even if it's for the same money that they're applying for in the paycheck protection loan, what would happen is that disaster relief loan would be refinanced into the paycheck protection loan in order to convert it to forgivable funds. But everybody's been jumping on the SBA website to get that free $10,000 that they're talking about. Unfortunately, the $10,000 advance that is not repayable, even if the disaster relief loan is denied, or if you don't end up accepting the loan itself, if you did get that free $10,000, it will actually reduce the amount. It reduces the amount of forgiveness that you're eligible for under the Paycheck Protection Loan, so that there is essentially no duplication. Now, there are some circumstances where potentially a business, the Paycheck Protection Program does provide that if you receive the disaster relief loan after January 31st, and if the funds from that relief loan if the amount of the loan was based on things other than payroll costs that are covered by the Paycheck Protection Program, then you can actually get a paycheck protection loan for the amount of your 2.5 months of average payroll plus the amount of the disaster relief loan that you took on top of it. So you can actually get more than your 2.5 months. And so theoretically, if somebody were in that situation, or they were in a situation where their non-payroll expenses are very high, if their rent, mortgage interest, utilities, and things like that are very high and essentially are greater than 1/2 of a month of average payroll, then in theory, if they got the disaster relief loan and then added it to the paycheck protection loan, then potentially they could get the full 2.5 months forgiven plus some portion of the disaster relief loan forgiven as well. And so it really just comes down to the numbers. But I think for the average business, most of them are not going to need the disaster relief loan, or it's not going to be worthwhile to get the disaster relief loan because it's just going to be an overlap of the paycheck protection loan. And it's going to require you to go through a second step of converting that loan into the paycheck protection loan when you could have just never worried about the disaster relief loan in the first place and still gotten all the same money under the paycheck protection loan. It's forgivable and all those things. So those are most of the main points. The one other thing that I mentioned that I'll go into a little bit, is when we talked about the ambiguity and how they are treating independent contractors and owners of pass-through businesses. And so one question is, say you take, for example, a real estate agent. Real estate agents are independent contractors, but at the same time, they are paid by their agency, and the CARES Act specifically allows businesses to obtain a paycheck to include the payments that they make to independent contractors in their average monthly payroll costs. So if you have a real estate agency that has fewer than 500 agents, then in theory, they're allowed to apply for a CARES Act loan for all the money that they pay their agents, 2.5 months worth of average commissions for all their agents. But agents themselves are independent contractors. So then does that mean they're also allowed to apply for their own money, or do they only apply for money if they have employees that they pay out of that money? And so then, in theory, the real estate agency would get their loan for the 2.5 months worth of payments that they make to their agents. They actually make those payments to the agents, and then the agents get that as their income. But then, in addition, um, they get money to pay for their employees if they have employees on their team. But what happens in the same circumstance if you have an agency that has more than 500 agents? And so that way, in that situation, the agency itself is not entitled to the Paycheck Protection Loan in the first place. And so then is the agent entitled to apply for the money that the agency otherwise would have applied for? So there's some question. Or the other circumstances, what if you have, like, suppose you have somebody who has an S corporation, and let's say there are two different S corporations, and in one of them the owner pays themselves a $20,000 salary, and they have $80,000 of pass-through income on top of that. And in the other one, the owner pays themselves an $80,000 salary and has $20,000 of pass-through income. Does one of them only get a loan for 2.5 months worth of $20,000 salary, and the other get a 2.5 months of $80,000 salary? Or do both of them get 2.5 months worth of the combined $100,000 that is the salary and the pass-through income? So that is probably the most ambiguous issue in the entire act, is how they are treating independent contractors, sole proprietors, and particularly partners in a partnership. And are people who own partnerships and pass-through entities entitled to 2.5 months worth of their average pass-through income over the last 12 months? Or are there any limitations on that? At this point, we don't really have a clear answer, but it seems to make the most sense that essentially, if somebody is an independent contractor or a partner in a partnership, or in a situation where they are not being paid by somebody else who has the ability to claim that money on their behalf, then really they should be entitled to that money, because otherwise they are stuck with no income whatsoever. They're the only people that aren't getting saved. And so we have been suggesting to people that, and of course, we're hoping that the Treasury Department and the SBA will be providing some guidance to banks on this, because ultimately it's whatever the banks are the ones who determine what amount is eligible, or what amount the business is eligible for in the loan. So we are suggesting to clients that they include the pass-through portion in the application, but that they make it clear in the documentation that that pass-through amount is being included in the computation. And then, either the banks will make a decision, or hopefully the banks will have some guidance from the SBA at that point as to what is includable and what is not. In theory, even if it remains ambiguous, and the banks agree that it should apply to sole proprietor, or that it should apply to pass-through income, and they grant the loan, if for some reason later on down the road, when it comes to calculating forgiveness, the government comes out and says, no, we never intended that, it was only for strictly employees and people that you pay, then effectively you still just end up with a loan that's payable over 10 years at 4% interest. So that's an issue that we're hoping we'll get some clarification sooner rather than later, but we still it's very ambiguous on that front. But so those are the basics. So I guess I don't know, Chris, do you want me to scroll through the questions here and answer them as they go?
Yeah,
Does that
I'm good
work?
at that. That'll
Okay.
probably be easiest. So go for it.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. All right. I will start up here. So let's see. John, I got the question. What if it's more? I saw that come up, and I can't recall uh, at what point what I was talking about at that point. I think the question had to do with FTE calculations.
Can you hear
So
me?
essentially, yeah. What's that?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hey, how you doing, Phil? Hey, I was
Doing all
just
right, John. How about
wondering.
you?
So
Yeah.
good, man. So last year my payroll was only with 2 guys. This year it's with 4. So are they going to take that into account, or is it just going to be an average to kind of like? So I'll be getting a lot less than what I really need to make now. And that was
Right.
my.
Yes. Okay. Yep. That's a good question. So it depends. There are actually 2 or 3 different calculations that can be used, but the alternate calculations can only be used for businesses that were not in business on February 15th of 2020, or let's see, no, I think for businesses that have not been in business for more than 12 months, and then or also seasonal employers. And I don't have a good list of who is considered to be a seasonal employer, because there are some SBA guidelines on that. But um, if you're a seasonal employer, you can actually use a couple different calculations. Um, you can use January and February of 2020 and divide by 2. That is one of the alternate calculations for seasonal employers. Or if you were in business in February of 2019, you can use a period of either February 2019 through June 30th, 2019, or you can elect to use March 1st through June 30th, 2019, and you can take the monthly average of that amount and use that as your calculation. But so, John, if you have more employees now than you did a year ago, your best bet is going to be you're going to use the past 12 months, and it is going to skew the average down a little bit. And so it's very possible that the amount that you get based on the average number of or average monthly payroll is not going to be enough to cover is not going to be the equivalent of 2.5 months of income of payroll now. But basically, that's one of the limitations, and it'll just be, the money, unfortunately, it goes as far as it goes. It may go a little further for others, but yeah, if you have more FTEs now than you did back then, or your payroll has increased over the past 12 months, then you only get the average of the last 12 months. And then also, when it comes to the FTE calculation, if your FTEs are more at the end than they were at the beginning, then that's perfectly fine. It's just they want to make sure that you have not laid people off and are getting money based on your last 12 months, even though your payroll is a lot lower now. Okay, so question, what does the number of jobs box refer to on the SBA application? That is a good question that we had to figure out. But basically, we are quite certain that is the verification that you don't have more than 500 employees. And so however many employees you have right now, both full and part-time, you put that number. That is not going to be the FTE average calculation, which was my exact question when the application first came out. It's just, do you have more than 500 employees? And as long as your number on that application is less than 500 and it's not a lie, then you'll be good. All right, let's see. Okay, yeah. Which institution do we apply for, and where do we find the applications? So the applications are available on the web. I don't have the app. Let me see here. I've got the application. It is. Let's see. Oh, I got kicked off my system. It's an SBA form. If you search Paycheck Protection Loan Application, you'll find it on Google. It's an SBA form now. And you can apply for it at any SBA authorized bank. The act says that they are going to expand authority to other banks that are not currently SBA banks to be able to make these loans. our recommendation is there are a lot of SBA principles that still apply to these loans that are rather complex, and especially this issue regarding affiliation and things like that. So we are recommending to people that they would be much better off going with a bank that is already an SBA approved lender, because that they will be familiar with all of these background issues that any other lender who doesn't already have SBA experience is not really going to be familiar with. And so it could potentially derail the application or delay it, things like that. So we're recommending that anybody who is currently an SBA lender, you go with them. I have heard that there's a bank called Town and Country Bank out there that is an approved SBA lender. There's also, I know a few other folks. There's a gentleman up at Edwardsville Bank and Bank of Belleville. So unfortunately, I got to give a few names out there, but go with an approved SBA lender currently. Let's see here. And then let's see, does payroll include 1099 agents who work on our teams? Yes, that is correct. It's anybody that you pay. If you are a business that pays employees and or independent contractors, your monthly average applies to all of them. And so you take all of those amounts that you've paid to all of those people over the past 12 months and divide it by 12, multiply it by 2.5, and that's your number. And then let's see here. And then, there's a question. Let's see, whose commissions are run and paid through our office and not us? I'm not sure. We'd have to. We should talk about that one. I'm not sure about that question. On rents, does there have to be a specific lease? I would say no. As long as the rent that you're actually paying, you can document that it was actually for rent. I'd probably advise people against things like if you own your own building where you also operate your business and you own them in a separate entity but have never paid yourself rent, don't necessarily start paying rent just to satisfy the requirement. That could be a little bit of an issue. But if you pay rent and have been paying rent and don't actually have a written lease, but you can document the fact that it is actually for rent, then absolutely that should be fine. Let's see. A work comp audit. The question is, would a work comp audit be a good tool to utilize for payroll determination? Not necessarily. Really, what this is going to be is actual expenses over the last 12 months. So it's not based on the number of employees times their hourly rate or things like that, or their salaries. It's actual compensation. And I should add that it includes vacation time that you have paid to them, sick time that you've paid, overtime, any of those things. So basically what everybody will need to do is go back through their actual payroll records and add up all of the payroll over the last 12 months, gross pay that has been paid to the employees before you took money out for withholdings, before you paid over the withholdings and the FICA and Medicare and things like that. And you just take the actual gross payroll and then add to it any health benefits, retirement benefits, and state unemployment insurance that you paid. And that's going to be your number. The question here is, will the loan be in the proprietor's name or the company's name? So if you are a sole proprietor and you have a company name and you have a separate EIN because you actually have payroll and have employees, the application itself will be through your name. The application process actually has a spot for your name and then a doing business as name. And so you'd put both of those down, but then it also asks for the taxpayer identification number. And presumably you would be using your federal EIN as opposed to your social security number, but the loan would presumably be in the actual individual proprietor's name for a sole proprietorship. There's a question of what can you spend the 25% on? So that is rental expenses, loan interest for any business loans that you own. That could be mortgages for buildings on the business, for buildings that you use in the business, or just any operating loan that the business has that has an interest component. So it's loan interest, rent expense for rental of utilities or rental of buildings or equipment, anything like that, and then utilities expenses. So those are the three things that you can spend the 25% on. Of course, we recommend that you prioritize payroll and spend it all on payroll first, and then whatever's left over, you can spend it on those other authorized expenses and still get loan forgiveness. So let's see, we have a question here. Is it just keeping the number of employees during the February through June 30th or keeping the same employees? Yes, so it's just keeping the same number of employees. So as a matter of fact, I just spoke with a client today who has an employee who quit on them, saying that he's afraid of getting the coronavirus, but we're quite certain that it's really because he just wants to get all that extra unemployment. So so it's not, they will not have any detriment as long as they replace him, and they've actually already replaced him. So if you have employees that have left or have been laid off, and as long as you bring them back, or the question here is, what if one of them doesn't come back for any reason whatsoever? As long as you fill that position prior to June 30th, it will still all be forgivable. It's all about the total number of full-time equivalent employees you maintain during the relevant periods, not the actual individuals. Part-time, question is, are part-time employees one half of an FTE? That's actually something we're still working on. Generally speaking, yes. I don't know if yet. So say you have a part-time employee who only works 10 hours a week. I'm not sure if that factors into a half an FTE, or if that factors into a 0.25 FTE. That's actually something that we're working on looking at right now, because all of the calculations are related to average monthly FTEs. So we don't know yet how you calculate fractions of FTEs yet in terms of the number of hours and things, but at worst, it would be every part-time employee is a half an FTE and every full-time employee is a full FTE, and it would use the average that way. But it could be better than that. It may be that part-time employees with fewer than 20 hours or whatever would be less than a half. Does the health insurance amount include dental and vision, group and life insurance we pay for? So it includes dental and vision. We believe it includes dental and vision. We consider those to be health insurance. It would not include life insurance. And then just be careful to remember that you would only be, the health and dental and vision would only be the portion that the employer pays. So if you have if you withhold from an employee's paycheck for their share of the health premium, that amount is already included in their gross wages. And so when you're adding the numbers together, you would take the gross wages and then just the employer's share of the health premium and dental and vision on top of that. I've got a comment, Saints Avenue Bank in St. Charles. So anybody out in St. Charles who needs an SBA loan, it sounds to me like they may be an SBA authorized lender. Is there a deadline to apply? Yes, that deadline, I believe, is June 30th. I will double check that, but yes, I'm pretty sure that the program runs from now until June 30th, and after June 30th, applications are closed. Okay, let's see here. There's a couple questions. Someone has some questions about affiliates, but I don't see the actual questions here, so I'm happy to answer those later. Feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. Okay, what if they're an S-Corp? Put it in the S-Corp name. Is that correct? Yes. If the employer is an S-Corp, the application would be for the corporation itself. It would be under the S-Corp's employer ID number. And then again, the one question that really is not very clearly answered is when the S-Corp is filing its application and it calculates its monthly payroll costs, would that monthly payroll cost include the pass-through income that passes through to the owners and not just the salary that is paid to the owners. So that's the question. We believe that the answer should be that that the corporation would include the pass-through income to the employee or to the owners up to $100,000. And I forgot to mention that there is actually, oh wait, no, never mind. That's a separate issue. So yeah, it would of course be limited to $100,000 in the salary plus pass through, the combination of the two. But we're suggesting that it should be that the monthly average should at least include the pass through income to the owners. As of what day can we apply? I believe that's going to be tomorrow for businesses other than sole proprietors and independent contractors. And then applications for sole proprietors and independent contractors are supposed to open up beginning April 10th. So anybody who is not a sole prop or an independent contractor, it's opening tomorrow. So I'd get on it. All right. If people are only getting the first 10,000 of grant money, are the expense requirements, documentation requirements the same? So this is a reference to the disaster relief loan, which I mentioned is not the same thing as the Paycheck Protection Plan or Paycheck Protection Program loan. So if somebody does get this $10,000 of grant money, number one, they should certainly apply for the Paycheck Protection Program to the extent that their payroll costs are more than that. If they have no payroll costs, then really they just shouldn't even apply for the Paycheck Protection Program in the first place and keep the free $10,000 of grant money. And then the one thing to be conscious about is if you do have more payroll costs than the $10,000, then you would apply for a Paycheck Protection Program loan for your full amount. Presumably it would be reduced by the amount of the $10,000 grant, assuming that grant was provided for payroll costs in the first place. And then it's possible that depending on all of those factors, what the $10,000 was for in the first place, whether or not it duplicates, whether or not it's added to the 2.5 months. There are a lot of variables in there, but essentially that $10,000 may or may not end up getting forgiven at the end. But the general answer is yes. If you're applying for a Paycheck Protection Program loan, you'd still need to provide all of the requirements showing the documenting the expenses and documenting your payroll and things like that. And then hopefully the 10,000 would roll into the Paycheck Protection loan, and it would still end up getting forgiven. But there's a possibility that all but $10,000 could would end up being forgiven because it was a disaster relief loan grant. If we provide life insurance, that's a duplicate question. No, life insurance doesn't count. Okay, yes, there's a note here that says act sooner rather than later. The funds will run out. The banks should have a pre-application and will be prioritizing customers first. Yeah, we are wondering how long $350 billion will last. As much as that is a very real possibility that maybe the funds would run out, and we'd recommend that people apply as soon as possible. And hopefully, potentially, if that money runs out, then maybe Congress would do something to expand the program to provide relief to everybody. But yeah, who knows how long it'll last. Question here: would our subcontractors that get a 1099 be the ones to include? I assume not the subcontractors that don't get a 1099 because they're actually their own LLC or S corp. Generally, that would probably be correct. If you are paying another generally speaking, if you are paying another business entity, then that business entity, the payments to that business entity would presumably be excluded. That does leave that entity in the position of ambiguity that we talked about, where who knows whether or not they're, if it's just a single member S corporation, are they going to be able to apply for the money that, just their pass-through income? But generally speaking, yeah, we interpret it to mean that this business itself could only apply for individual subcontractors that are paid on a 1099 through their social security number, effectively, is what I would say it should include. Question, can self-employed health insurance paid by the individual be included in qualified expenses? That is a really good question. I would, let's see. So if that is for a sole proprietorship, I would say yes, it should be included. It gets back to the question of, what portion of their income is includable in the program to begin with. But to the extent that pass-through income is allowed, they should add. I would say that they should add their self-employed health insurance on top of that. If it's an S corp or something, I forget when the S corp would include the self-employed health insurance on the 1040 instead of the 1120S. But yeah, potentially it could be. Mike, we'll talk about that later. Let's see. Question, please clarify, are there benefits available for sole props with no employees? Yes, that is the answer that has no clarification at the moment. Essentially, the question is, can a sole proprietorship file an application for 2.5 months worth of essentially their net income from the business? I would say yes, they should be entitled to, because they are the ones that are going to be left out of this whole thing if they operate a business. So, for example, say if you have a sole proprietorship that operates just a retail store and works, they're the only person that works there, and they have no employees, but they also only generate revenue from the general public, and are not paid by somebody else as a 1099 contractor. You would think they should be able to get some money, but it really is not clear in that scenario whether or not they will be entitled to any money. We're hoping that there will be some clarification on that soon. Okay, to be clear, someone could get the $10,000 grant without a PPP loan. Yes, that is correct. I would say the only person who would want to do that is somebody who has no employees and would not be applying for a PPP loan in the first place, because otherwise the $10,000 grant really no longer is a $10,000 grant, and you just have to jump through the extra hoop of getting the PPP loan anyway. But if somebody were not going to get a PPP loan for any reason, but had suffered an economic injury, such as a loss of revenue, things like that, is covered by the disaster relief loan, then yes, they could apply for the disaster relief loan, get the $10,000 grant, and not have to repay that money. Question, will well-capitalized businesses be penalized? The effects of the pandemic will still hurt them as well. There will be no litmus test to prove a hard time paying 8 weeks of qualified expenses, correct? Yes, that is correct. We do not see anything at all in the Act that states that you have to have suffered an actual economic injury at the present time. The only thing you have to do, as I mentioned, is certify that due to the current uncertainty of the economic climate, the applying for this loan is necessary in order to support ongoing payroll. And again, our interpretation of that is it's really an anti-fraud certification, not an attestation under oath that you have already lost money and are guaranteed to lose money. So potentially there are some businesses who are eligible for this money that may, for any number of reasons, not actually end up suffering an economic detriment or an economic injury, and they will have just gotten an extra benefit from this program. But no, businesses that essentially, you don't have to prove that you have already lost money in order to be eligible for these funds, or to show that it's demonstrate that this is an actual financial hardship. Alrighty, let's see here. Okay, one more time, what to include in the 12-month calculation for the number to put on the application? Sure. So it is gross payroll. So essentially, when you have your employees and you enter into your payroll system, their total gross pay. that is the number that you start with. So you start off with gross pay, and then of course, typically in the paycheck, then you show all of the withholdings, the Social Security and Medicare withholdings, state tax withholdings, all of those, and then you get down to the net pay. The net pay is not the number, the gross pay is the number. And then on top of that, you can add the health insurance and vision and dental that the employer pays, and you can add in retirement benefits that the employer pays, and you can add in essentially state unemployment insurance that the employer pays. If, for example, if somebody, if their gross pay is $1,000 and the employer's health insurance premium is $200 and it's a 90%, 10% split between the employer and the employee. The employee's pay is $1,000. They're going to pay $20 out of their paycheck for the health insurance, but that's not the employee's gross pay is still $1,000, and then the $180 that the employer pays for the health insurance would be added on top of that. So it'd be $1,180 is the starting calculation. And then in addition, same thing, any amounts that the employees contribute to a 401k or a retirement plan is not added on top because it's already included in the gross number. But if there's an employer match or a profit sharing contribution or a safe harbor contribution by the employer to the retirement plan, then the amount that the employer contributes is added on top of the $1,000 of gross pay that's already paid to the employee. And then the same thing for state unemployment, up to the wage base of like $12,000, at your, 1, 2, 3% or whatever it is, you can add that on top in addition. All right, let's see. What about self-employed individuals like musicians who are solely 1099 employees? Again, it depends on if they have an employer that pays them, but pays them as a 1099. If they're paid by one general employer, then the employer should apply for the money and then give the money to the 1099 employee. If it's somebody who, teaches, piano lessons and has a bunch of, does piano lessons at $20 a lesson or whatever, that's a big question. I don't know whether or not they would be eligible. We hope that they would be for their pass-through income. Is there any income profit minimums on the $10,000 grant? If somebody has a side business that has been affected by this, can they still get it? I don't know all of the requirements for the disaster relief loan funds. I do know that essentially when you apply for it, you indicate what your normal gross revenue and expenses are, and then your total payroll, and then you submit the application, and then the SBA determines whether or not you're eligible. But in theory, the disaster relief application or that loan covers more than what the PPP loan covers. So it covers losses in revenue and things like that. So it's possible that anybody who has, even a part-time business, they might be eligible for an EDIL loan. All righty, let's see. All right, last question here. Money can be used toward rent, but rent isn't calculated in the total. Yes, that is correct. So there's a complete dichotomy between the amount of the loan and the amount and what you can spend it on in the calculation of the forgiveness. So the amount of the loan is 2.5 times average monthly payroll, but the amount of forgiveness is 8 weeks worth of qualified expenses. And so as long as you spend 2.5 months worth of average payroll on payroll, rent, utilities, and loan interest, then yes, it would all end up being forgiven. So, all righty. I think that covers all the questions. Chris,
awesome.
I will drop it back to you.
Cool. Well, Phil, I appreciate you being on here so much. Thanks for taking the time. I know you've been literally eating, sleeping, and breathing this thing like you mentioned. So I appreciate you taking some time to get on here and share all the good nuggets with us. And like I said, we will be emailing out. We're going to put together the recording and everything from this. And we will be sending it out to everybody that RSVP'd and those that gave me their email addresses. We're hoping to get that out here in the next couple of days. So I appreciate everybody's time. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay positive. We're all going to get through this and move on. So, Phil, thanks again for being on here, and hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
And actually, Chris, if you could circulate, there were a couple comments of people asking for my contact info so that they could ask some more specific questions. So yeah, feel free to, if you can send it out, or here, I'll tell you what, I can chat it real quick just in case for anybody who's still on.
Go for it.
And then, certainly if people have more specialized questions, I'm happy to chat about that specifically. We can help them out. So there's my, my office number. Feel free to leave a message. Of course, we're working remotely. But I get all of my voicemails immediately through my email, so I will see them come through, or feel free to send me an email at that address. I'm happy to help out.
Awesome. I'll probably put a slide at the end of your talk because I'm going to put an iMovie and do some editing on it. So I'll probably put a slide at the end of it with your contact info on it too, just so people have it as well. So
sounds good.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Phil. You guys have a great day. Thanks for being on here, guys.